Welcome to Boring History, where the forgotten whispers of the past meet quiet storytelling. Today, we travel back to the hidden heights of the Andes to uncover lost Inca secrets. How was built America years ago? A journey into the silent stones, sacred paths, and enduring mysteries of the Inca world. The Inca civilization rose high in the Andes, surrounded by towering peaks and valleys carved by rivers that never seemed to rest. Within this dramatic and unforgiving landscape, the Inca people created works of engineering so remarkable that they still confuse and fascinate experts centuries later. They worked without iron tools, without the wheel, and without written language in the sense we understand today, yet they left behind an empire knit together by roads, bridges, and cities that seemed to merge into the mountains themselves. The stones of their temples and fortresses stand tightly locked, cut and placed so precisely that not even a blade of grass can slide between them, and these structures have resisted earthquakes that toppled later colonial buildings. The scale of their construction, the sophistication of their planning, and the durability of their works raise questions about how such achievements were possible with the technologies they are believed to have had, and this sense of quiet wonder lingers when we look at the walls of Cusco, the terraces of Pisac, or the citadel of Machu Picchu. Each stone tells a story of labor, patience, and a connection to the land that feels almost impossible to comprehend from the modern point of view. And yet these achievements are there, silent and enduring in the thin mountain air. The foundations of Inca engineering lay in their understanding of the environment and their ability to adapt to it with great skill. The Andes offered challenges few civilizations elsewhere had to face: steep slopes, unstable soil, earthquakes, and dramatic changes in climate across short distances. Rather than being defeated by these obstacles, the Inca found ways to turn them into opportunities. Terracing became one of their most recognizable solutions, as they carved the mountainsides into giant steps supported by retaining walls, transforming rugged hills into fields that could support agriculture. These terraces controlled erosion, captured water, and stabilized the land for construction. They were not just practical farms but also vast experiments in altitude and climate, since different crops could be grown at different levels of elevation, allowing the Inca to manage food production with remarkable efficiency. From the sacred valley of the Urubamba to the distant corners of their empire, terraces stretch across the landscape, reminding us that their mastery of engineering was tied directly to survival and to the spiritual reverence they felt for the earth they called Pachamama. Stonework was at the heart of Inca architecture and remains one of the most baffling aspects of their engineering. The builders shaped enormous stones, sometimes weighing dozens of tons, with such accuracy that the joints between them are almost invisible. Without the use of mortar, the stones locked together in ways that allow walls to flex slightly during seismic tremors, absorbing the shock and preventing collapse. This technique is known as ashlar masonry, and its resilience has been proven over centuries, withstanding earthquakes that destroyed later Spanish structures built right next to them. The most famous examples can be seen in the walls of Sacsayhuamán, a massive fortress above Cusco, where stones the size of small rooms fit together in irregular but flawless patterns, and in the 12-angled stone in the city of Cusco, admired for the perfection of its fitting. The mystery of how the Inca quarried, transported, and set these stones remains debated. Some believe they used stone hammers and chisels made from harder rock, slowly shaping each block over weeks or months, while others suggest advanced techniques of levering, dragging, or even softening stone through chemical means, though the latter lacks firm evidence. Whatever the method, the result is an engineering achievement that continues to puzzle modern stonemasons and architects. Roads were another monumental accomplishment, forming the backbone of the Inca Empire, which stretched thousands of kilometers across mountains, deserts, and forests. Known as the Sacsayhuamán, or Great Inca Road, this network connected far-flung provinces to the capital at Cusco, enabling communication, transport, and control across a realm that lacked horses, carts, or wheels. These roads were built with a deep understanding of the terrain. In the highlands, they zigzagged along ridges and valleys, reinforced with stone paving, retaining walls, and drainage systems. In coastal deserts, They were marked with simple lines of stones to guide travelers across featureless sands. Suspension bridges made from woven plant fibers spanned gorges and rivers, some stretching more than 100 feet, replaced regularly by communal effort. These bridges were marvels of tensile strength, combining simplicity and functionality in ways that engineers today still admire. The network was so extensive and so well maintained that messages could travel hundreds of kilometers in just a few days, carried by runners known as chasquis, who relayed information across the empire. The scale of this system rivals that of Rome, yet it was achieved in a setting far more challenging than the Mediterranean basin, making it one of the greatest achievements of pre-Columbian engineering. Water management revealed another layer of Inca ingenuity. The empire depended on precise control of water for farming, for rituals, and for daily life. Aqueducts and canals carried streams across terraces and into cities, using gravity with exact calculations to ensure steady flow without flooding. In Machu Picchu, fountains and channels were carved into the stone itself, distributing water throughout the citadel in ways that still function today. At Tipon, near Cusco, a complex system of canals, terraces, and ritual fountains demonstrates an advanced knowledge of hydraulics. The builders could calculate slopes and gradients with great accuracy, ensuring water flowed evenly and predictably, a necessity in a region where too much rain could wash away soil and too little could bring famine. Water was not only a practical resource, but also a sacred element tied to their cosmology, and the integration of waterworks into temples and plazas shows that engineering and spirituality were never separate in the Inca mind. The scale of labor required for these achievements raises further questions. The Inca did not rely on slave labor in the way other ancient civilizations did, but rather on a system called myth, in which communities contributed labor as a form of tax to the state. This system mobilized massive numbers of workers for building projects, road maintenance, and agricultural production. Entire villages could be tasked with quarrying stone, transporting it along steep mountain paths, or shaping it into precise forms, all coordinated with remarkable efficiency by administrators who used quipus, knotted strings that recorded data. This system created not just buildings and roads, but also a sense of unity, binding together the diverse peoples of the empire under a shared obligation and contribution. The fact that so much labor was willingly given reflects the central role of reciprocity in Inca society, where the state provided protection, food, and stability in return for service, and where the emperor, the Sapa Inca, was seen as a divine figure whose authority justified such efforts. Agricultural terraces, stone temples, suspension bridges, and roads are visible reminders of Inca engineering, but the invisible knowledge behind them is equally astonishing. They had no compasses, no metal tools beyond bronze or copper, no draft animals beyond the llama, and yet they aligned temples with astronomical events, oriented cities with cardinal directions, and managed resources across varied landscapes with a precision that still functions centuries later. Their ability to read the land, to sense its strengths and weaknesses, and to integrate construction with nature rather than against it allowed them to create structures that appear almost organic, as if the mountains themselves were shaping their works. Machu Picchu, perched between peaks and shrouded in mist, feels less like a city imposed on the land and more like a place revealed from it, as though the builders had coaxed stone and soil into harmony with their vision. Their feats of engineering were not limited to the physical structures alone, but extended into the very concept of empire. The Inca managed to hold together a realm stretching from modern Colombia to Chile, covering deserts, rainforests, and mountain ranges, by using engineering as a tool of cohesion. Roads ensured swift movement of armies, terraces ensured reliable food supplies, and administrative centers like Cusco radiated power through monumental architecture. Each stone wall, each paved road, each carefully aligned temple reinforced the idea of a civilization built not only with hands, but with collective will, a civilization that saw the land as a living partner in its destiny. The architecture of the Inca was never only stone, never only mortar, never only the labor of hands. It was also the embodiment of beliefs, a silent prayer expressed in geometry, alignment, and form. Each wall, each terrace, each carved rock was shaped not only for function but also for meaning, and within these choices we glimpse the spiritual life of a people, who saw no separation between the physical and the sacred. The mountains, which they called apus, were not mere backdrops but powerful beings, protectors and witnesses. When the Inca built their temples and cities, they did so with the apus in mind, orienting plazas, doorways and sightlines so that the rising sun, the solstice, or the distant silhouette of a peak became part of the design. Architecture became a dialogue between humans and gods, a way of weaving their presence into the stone, and ensuring that every act of construction honored forces larger than themselves. At the heart of this worldview was the principle of reciprocity, aini, the idea that all relationships were mutual exchanges of giving and receiving. This principle shaped social life, labor, and even architecture, because the structures themselves were gifts to the gods, to the sun, to the earth, and in return these sacred forces were expected to grant fertility, stability, and protection. When a temple was built, it was not simply to provide a place for rituals, but also to balance this ongoing exchange. Stone was lifted from the mountain, shaped, and returned in a new form, symbolizing the cycle of taking and giving back. Water channels were carved not only to irrigate fields, but to direct life, giving streams through spaces where offerings could be made, turning a utilitarian feature into a ritual element. In this sense, Inca architecture was inseparable from Inca spirituality because every structure served both the body and the spirit. The Temple of the Sun in Cusco, known as Coricancha, offers a vivid example of how architecture expressed devotion. Once covered in sheets of gold that reflected the first rays of dawn, the temple was the most sacred site in the empire. Its walls were built with the finest masonry, stones polished and fitted with a precision that conveyed reverence. Inside, shrines to the sun, moon, stars, and thunder formed a cosmic map of the Inca universe. The very layout of the temple was aligned with astronomical events, so that solstices and equinoxes cast light into designated niches, affirming the bond between celestial cycles and human ritual. Surrounding the temple were gardens filled not only with plants, but with golden replicas of maize, llamas, and birds, offerings crafted to embody abundance and fertility. When priests performed ceremonies there, they did so within a space that united earth, sky, and the divine essence of the Sapa Inca, who was believed to be a child of the sun. Machu Picchu, though often admired for its dramatic scenery, carries layers of spiritual meaning as well. Built high on a ridge between Huayna Picchu and Machu Picchu mountains, the site is filled with alignments and symbolic spaces. The Intihuatana stone, often called the hitching post of the sun, is carved in such a way that it marks the solar calendar, casting precise shadows during solstices. This was not merely an astronomical tool, but a sacred object that bound the sun to the earth, ensuring its continued return and the cycle of life. Temples within the citadel, such as the Temple of the Condor, integrated natural rock formations into their design, turning the landscape itself into sacred architecture. By blending built and natural forms, the Inca affirmed their belief that humanity was not separate from nature, but part of its spiritual order, a reflection of cosmic harmony. The placement of entire cities also reflected spiritual significance. Cusco, the capital, was laid out in the shape of a puma, a sacred animal symbolizing strength and earthly power. The head of the puma was Sacsayhuamán, the great fortress and ceremonial complex overlooking the city, while the body extended through the urban streets and plazas. This zoomorphic design was not decorative, but deeply meaningful, linking the city's form to the Andean triad of animals, the condor for the upper world, the puma for the middle world, and the snake for the underworld. By inhabiting a city shaped like a sacred creature, the people lived within their cosmology, surrounded by symbols that constantly reminded them of their place within the universe. Terracing, so often admired as an agricultural achievement, also carried symbolic weight. The vertical arrangement of terraces mirrored the Andean concept of verticality, where different ecological zones represented different worlds. Planting at various elevations was not only practical, but also ritual, each crop linked to offerings, ceremonies and gods associated with that environment. Maize grown on one terrace, potatoes on another, coca leaves on yet another, all contributed to a spiritual system in which food was not just sustenance but a gift infused with divine essence. When communities gathered to work the terraces, they did so with rituals that acknowledged the earth as Pachamama, a living mother whose nourishment required respect and gratitude. Even the materials used in construction had spiritual connotations. Stones were not inert objects but considered alive, with energy and spirit of their own. The act of quarrying, transporting, and shaping a stone was accompanied by ceremonies to honor its spirit, ensuring cooperation rather than resistance. Large stones incorporated into walls often retained their natural forms, suggesting that they were seen as sacred huacas, objects of veneration that carried ancestral or divine presence. In some temples, carved niches framed these stones like altars, blending the natural and the constructed into a seamless whole. This reverence for stone is why Inca architecture feels organic, as though the builders sought harmony rather than dominance over the landscape. Ritual pathways, plazas, and sightlines also played a crucial role in weaving spirituality into urban design. Plazas served as gathering places for festivals, sacrifices, and ceremonies where entire communities participated in honoring the gods. The vast open space of the main plaza in Cusco was designed for such collective rituals, reinforcing the unity of the empire through shared spiritual experience. Roads leading out from Cusco often aligned with sacred mountains or shrines, creating a Sikh system, an invisible network of spiritual lines radiating from the capital. Along these lines were huacas, sacred sites ranging from springs to carved stones, each with its own ritual calendar. Architecture and landscape were thus tied together into a sacred geography, where traveling a road meant moving through a ritual map as much as through physical space. Astronomy was deeply integrated into Inca architecture, reflecting their understanding of the heavens as guiding forces. Temples and observatories were built to track solstices, equinoxes, and the movement of stars, ensuring that agricultural and ceremonial calendars aligned with cosmic order. The alignment of windows, doorways, and walls with celestial events allowed priests to observe the heavens directly through the built environment. These observations were not abstract science but sacred acts, ensuring the harmony of the cosmos and the fertility of the earth. At Machu Picchu, the Temple of the Sun demonstrates this integration, with its curved walls oriented to capture the winter solstice sunrise. In Cusco, sightlines connected distant mountains with solar events, making the entire landscape a living observatory where architecture, nature, and sky formed a unified system of meaning. The cultural significance of Inca architecture extended beyond temples and cities into daily life. Homes, though simpler than monumental structures, were also built with symbolic considerations. Their rectangular forms with trapezoidal doorways echoed the same design principles seen in grander sites, reinforcing a sense of shared identity and cultural continuity. Roofs of thatch and walls of stone or adobe were not just shelters but spaces where families engaged in rituals tied to ancestors, agriculture, and community. Even modest dwellings reflected the Inca worldview, where every structure, no matter how small, participated in the greater order of the universe. The role of the Supper Inca was also expressed through architecture. As a living descendant of the sun, his palaces and estates were built with grandeur that reflected his divine status. Yet these palaces were not merely luxurious homes. They were centers of ritual, politics, and cultural integration. They stood as physical manifestations of his power, linking his presence to the cosmic order. Estates like Ollantaytambo combined military, agricultural, and spiritual functions, demonstrating how architecture expressed the unity of worldly and divine authority. The grandeur of these sites reinforced the cultural message that the Inca ruler was not simply a man, but a divine figure whose existence tied the people to the gods. Festivals brought architecture to life, filling plazas and temples with music, dance, offerings, and processions. Structures were not static but stages for ritual drama, where the community engaged in acts that renewed the world. During Inti Raymi, the Festival of the Sun, thousands gathered in Cusco to honor the life, giving power of the sun god, filling the city with ceremonies that required the presence of its sacred architecture. Buildings became participants in the ritual, their alignments with the sun reaffirming the cosmic cycles. Without the structures, the rituals would have lacked their frame. Without the rituals, the structures would have lacked their soul. The blending of architecture, spirituality, and culture ensured that Inca structures had enduring meaning, even after the fall of the empire. When the Spanish arrived, they recognized the power of these buildings and often built their churches atop Inca foundations, seeking to erase, and yet inadvertently preserving the strength of the original work. The persistence of these foundations speaks not only to their engineering, but to the depth of their spiritual significance. The stones carried meaning that could not be erased, a silent resistance that still speaks today through the survival of the walls beneath colonial facades. The question of how the Inca built their extraordinary cities, fortresses, and temples continues to drift like a whisper across the high Andes. The stones stand silently, their massive forms locked together without mortar, their edges so finely shaped that they resist the centuries with a stubborn grace. But the true methods used to create them remain hidden in the past. Unlike other civilizations that left behind extensive writings, detailed diagrams, or scrolls of instruction, the Inca relied on oral tradition and quipus, knotted cords used for record keeping. As a result, their exact construction techniques were never recorded in a form that survived. What we are left with today is the evidence of the stones themselves: the walls of Cusco, the terraces of Pisac, the fortress of Sacsayhuamán, the citadel of Machu Picchu, each one presenting riddles that stir the imagination of archaeologists, historians, and visitors alike. The precision of Inca stonework has long fascinated observers. Enormous blocks of granite and andesite, sometimes weighing more than 50 tons, were carved to interlock in complex, polygonal patterns. No mortar was used, and yet the joints fit so perfectly that a knife blade cannot pass between them. This level of precision suggests a deep knowledge of stone, not only how to shape it, but how to place it so that the walls could withstand the powerful earthquakes common in the Andes. Later colonial buildings constructed with mortar often crumbled in seismic events, but the Inca walls remained, flexing slightly and settling back into place. To achieve such a result required a mastery of technique, but how this was achieved with the tools available remains a central mystery. The Inca had no iron or steel. Their chisels were made of bronze or copper, materials too soft to cut granite effectively. Archaeologists believe they used hammerstones of harder rock, such as diorite, to pound and chip away at the surface of softer stone, gradually shaping each block. This process would have been painstaking and slow, demanding countless hours of labor for each stone. To smooth surfaces, they may have used sand as an abrasive, rubbing it against the stone until the desired finish was achieved. The irregular, jigsaw-like shapes of many walls suggest that each stone was shaped to fit precisely into the next, as though the builders worked in 3 dimensions, constantly adjusting and refining until the puzzle locked into place. The patience required for such a task is difficult to imagine, especially given the scale of construction at sites like Sacsayhuamán, where vast walls rise in terraces of massive stones. Transporting these blocks adds another layer of enigma. The Inca had no wheels, no draft animals capable of hauling such loads, and yet stones were moved from distant quarries to building sites often high on steep mountainsides. The accepted theory is that stones were dragged using ropes, logs, and manpower, with hundreds or even thousands of workers pulling in unison. Ramps of earth and stone may have been built to raise the blocks into position, and levers could have been used to shift them incrementally. The sheer organization required for such tasks points to a sophisticated administrative system, with careful planning, allocation of labor through the meter system, and knowledge of physics and coordination that allowed human effort to achieve feats that seem impossible when viewed from a modern perspective. Still, the precise logistics of moving 50-ton stones across rugged terrain without the wheel remains unresolved, leaving ample room for speculation. Some legends suggest alternative explanations, passed down through Andean oral traditions. One recurring story tells of the stones being softened by plants or liquids that allowed them to be molded into place before hardening again. This idea of stone softening has intrigued researchers but remains without scientific proof. It reflects, however, the sense of awe felt even by descendants of the Inca when contemplating the work of their ancestors, as if only a kind of lost knowledge or forgotten technology could explain such perfection. Other more speculative theories propose that the Inca possessed knowledge of techniques we do not recognize today, perhaps advanced forms of leverage, sound vibration, or heat treatment, but no direct evidence supports these ideas. What remains certain is that the stones defy easy answers. their silent perfection resisting the tools of modern understanding. The endurance of Inca structures adds further depth to the mystery. Built in a region prone to earthquakes, torrential rains, and landslides, these constructions remain remarkably intact. Their trapezoidal doorways and windows, wider at the base than at the top, provide stability, while their inward sloping walls distribute stress in ways that resist collapse. The polygonal stonework, with multiple angles and interlocking joints, allows walls to absorb seismic shocks without crumbling. This intuitive earthquake-resistant design reflects an empirical knowledge of the environment that was honed through generations. Yet how the builders arrived at such solutions without formalized mathematics or written architectural plans remains unknown. The wisdom embedded in these choices appears almost instinctive, as though the builders were reading the language of the earth itself. Another puzzle lies in the astronomical alignments found in many Inca sites. Stones, walls, and temples are oriented with precision to mark solstices, equinoxes, and the rising or setting of certain stars. Achieving this level of alignment required careful observation of the heavens, but also the ability to translate celestial events into architectural form. The placement of the Intihuatana stone at Machu Picchu, which marks the position of the sun during solstices, demonstrates an advanced understanding of astronomy. The question is not only how they observed and measured the sky, but how they incorporated that knowledge into construction with such precision, without written records or instruments beyond simple sighting tools. The blend of science, spirituality, and engineering deepens the mystery, suggesting that knowledge was encoded in practices we have yet to fully decode. Water management provides another layer of unanswered questions. At Machu Picchu, the complex network of fountains and channels distributes water evenly across the citadel, drawing from a spring located far uphill. The channels are carved with such precision that they regulate flow without overflow or waste, even after centuries of use. The hydraulic engineering is so refined that modern engineers still study it as an example of sustainable design. Yet without modern surveying tools, without the mathematics we associate with hydraulics, how did the Inca achieve such consistent gradients and flow rates across uneven terrain? The mystery lies not in the fact that they succeeded, but in the methods they used to ensure success. The quarries themselves raise further questions. At Ollantaytambo, massive unfinished blocks remain at the quarry site, some partially carved and abandoned. These remnants offer a glimpse of the process, showing that stones were rough, shaped at the quarry before being transported. But even with this knowledge, the question of logistics remains unresolved. Ropes made from llama wool or plant fibers could bear only so much weight, and wooden rollers were limited in a land without abundant large trees. Theories suggest that stones were slid along lubricated paths of clay or wet sand, or dragged over carefully prepared roads of cobblestone. Experiments have shown that large teams of people can indeed move stones of considerable size this way, but scaling such experiments to the dimensions of Inca projects remains daunting. The sight of unfinished stones lying as if frozen in mid-process invites speculation about whether construction was interrupted by sudden events, perhaps the Spanish conquest or natural disasters, leaving behind evidence of mysteries we cannot fully solve. The role of labor organization in these mysteries cannot be underestimated. The Mita system required communities to provide labor as a tax, mobilizing vast numbers of workers for state projects. This collective effort allowed projects of enormous scale to be completed. But how was this labor managed with such precision? Without writing, without blueprints, the coordination of thousands of people to move, shape, and place stones suggests methods of communication and leadership that we do not fully understand. Perhaps the quippus encoded logistical details we have not deciphered, or perhaps oral traditions passed down instructions with a clarity we cannot replicate. The mystery lies not only in the physical techniques, but also in the social technologies that allowed such projects to succeed. Archaeologists continue to debate whether the Inca inherited some of their stoneworking knowledge from earlier cultures, such as the Tiwanaku or Wari, whose ruins also display impressive masonry. If so, the Inca may have refined and expanded techniques already in use, combining them with their own innovations. This continuity of knowledge across centuries suggests that what we see as sudden brilliance may in fact might be the culmination of long traditions. Yet the mystery deepens when we realize that so little of this knowledge was recorded, leaving us with fragments that resist complete explanation. The stones remain, but the methods are silent. The aura of mystery has given rise to many alternative theories, some suggesting the involvement of lost civilizations, others invoking extraterrestrial intervention. And while mainstream archaeology finds no evidence for such claims, their persistence reflects the enduring sense of wonder these constructions inspire. When confronted with walls of stones so massive and so perfectly joined, it is natural to reach for extraordinary explanations. The very fact that the Inca achieved what seems impossible with the simplest of tools reminds us how much human ingenuity, patience, and collective effort can accomplish. Yet the gaps in our knowledge ensure that mystery remains part of their legacy. The mystery is not only technical but also cultural. Why did the Inca invest so much effort into building walls of such precision, when less perfect constructions might have sufficed? Why did they choose to align temples so exactly with celestial events, when approximate alignments would have been easier? These choices suggest values we may not fully grasp, a worldview in which precision itself was sacred, where harmony with the earth and sky demanded perfection. The enduring mystery is therefore not only how they built, but why they built the way they did, why such devotion to detail was necessary in their eyes. The answers may lie beyond engineering, in the spiritual and cultural dimensions that shaped their work, dimensions that resist analysis by modern methods, but can still be felt in the silent presence of their stones.